That? It's nothing but a mud fort. A woman won't finish it before the snow buries her.
Elizabeth didn't lift her head. She pounded her walls from raw earth, damp soil packed into a timber form, a foot thick.
Thomas would have told me to stop, but he's not here.
She'll give up when the ground freezes. Earth walls need a man's strength.
The wall grew, inch by inch, thick as a fortress. She had learned the soil's secrets from a journal her husband left behind.
A widow with a shovel and a dream. The town will have a good laugh come spring.
Let them laugh. The cold will have the last word.
By evening, someone had nailed a rough plank to a post. Hand-carved letters spelled Mud Fort. Elizabeth saw the sign, then turned back to her wall. The tamper never paused. The first sharp wind cut across the valley, carrying the scent of snow. Winter was not waiting for her to finish. That night, Elizabeth walked to the edge of town where the frozen ground held her husband's grave.
Thomas, I am going to build a house you'd be proud of, one that actually keeps the cold out.
The previous winter, Thomas had died of a fever caught in their drafty cabin, the walls too thin to hold any heat. She had sold everything but the land. The only thing left was the earth itself. In his journal, Thomas had written of ancient walls in far-off lands, thick, earthen, and lasting.
If those walls could last centuries, they can hold against one winter.
Before dawn, Elizabeth was back at the form, mixing the damp soil with grief that had nowhere else to go. She wiped her face with a soiled sleeve, and the earth smeared into the tracks of tears.
No more shivering in a leaky cabin. Not for me, not for anyone who needs shelter.
The wall rose another foot, solid as the promise made at a wooden cross. Through falling leaves and shortening days, Elizabeth mixed clay, sand, and gravel with a precision the town never saw. She tested the soil's moisture by squeezing it in her fist. It held together like a promise. Each layer was tamped until it rang solid, the timber forms groaning under the pressure of her grief.
Still playing in the mud, Elizabeth? The ground'll freeze before you finish that pile.
This mud will outlast your timber frames.
She didn't answer. The tamper rose and fell, packing earth into the final form. The last plank was pulled away, exposing a wall a foot thick, smooth as cut stone. Then the sky darkened, and the first fat snowflakes drifted down, melting on the fresh earth.
It's done. Now, let winter do its worst.
The snow thickened into a shroud, and Elizabeth turned her back on the town, walking toward her new walls. Inside her home, Elizabeth struck a match and lit the iron stove. The flame caught, and the thick earthen walls began their silent, invisible work. The rammed earth drank the heat like a living thing, held it deep, then released it slowly, a steady exhale against the bitter cold.
Already warm. Thomas, you were right about these walls.
Across town, Jacob's frame cabin bled warmth through 1,000 cracks. The wind found every one.
Winds cutting through again. These walls are nothing but kindling.
Let the wind howl. It can't reach in here. Not anymore.
By morning, Jacob's windows wore a thick coat of frost, and his breath hung in the air long after he spoke. But in Elizabeth's home, the windows were clear, the air mild, the stove barely sipping wood.
This is how a home should feel. Safe, warm.
She didn't know the first hard freeze had split barrels and frozen soup pots across town. She only knew she was warm. Around the valley, the first brutal cold snap settled in. It found every poorly chinked log and every thin pane of glass.
Just sleep, little one. Please, just sleep.
I hear Widow Hale is warm as toast in her mud castle. Rubbish. Probably just burning a whole forest in there. A freak of nature. Won't last. Earth walls crack when they freeze.
Cracks. Only if the soil wasn't right. Mine is right.
But the cold was a seed of doubt. A few wondered, if the earth walls were so foolish, why was Elizabeth the only one not complaining?
She's not cold. I can see it in the way the snow melts off her roof first.
They'll learn, or they'll freeze. I can't force them.
So the town clung to its mockery, as if contempt could seal the drafts. But the worst of winter was still weeks away, and the valley had not yet seen a storm that could tear the roofs from the stubborn. A brief thaw glazed the valley in ice. Then the freeze returned, harder than before, finding every weakness.
Mary and her child can't go another night in that draft.
She split a stack of dry spruce and hauled it across the frozen field to Mary's cabin.
You didn't have to. We were down to the last chair leg to burn.
Take it. The walls hold enough heat. I barely need a fire these nights.
The whole town should see how you live. They're fools to cling to their drafty boxes.
That night, Jacob's cough grew ragged and deep. His stove had guttered out, and the cold crept into his bones.
Can't feel my feet. The frost is winning.
Through a scraped patch of frost on his window, he saw the warm glow of Elizabeth's stove across the field.
Not one crack. Not a single blasted crack in that mud.
The mercury fell, and the sky turned the color of a bruise. A rider came through town shouting about a storm, the likes of which hadn't been seen in 20 years. Men scrambled to their rooftops, nailing down shingles and boarding windows. Women stuffed rags into every crack they could find. Jacob, still weak, hammered boards over his frosted panes with trembling hands. His cough doubled him over with each swing.
More nails. Must have more nails. This hovel won't stand a gale.
Across the field, Elizabeth walked the perimeter of her home, touching the smooth, solid walls. There was nothing to reinforce.
They laugh at mud. But this mud doesn't need nails.
Please, let us in. I don't trust our walls.
Elizabeth opened the door without a word, and the two stepped into the warmth. The first blast of wind hit the town a heartbeat later. The gale screamed down the valley, testing every nail, every shingle. It found the first loose board and tore it free with a shriek. But inside the earth house, the only sound was the stove's gentle crackle, and the walls did not even tremble. The gale tore through the night. It found a barn roof and peeled it back like a sardine can, then moved on to the houses. Inside his listing cabin, Jacob huddled beneath a collapsing beam. His breath came in ragged, icy gasps.
Should have built them thicker. Should have listened to my own doubts.
But the earth house merely hummed, a low, deep note that spoke of mass and stillness. Dawn broke pale and silent. The valley was a graveyard of lumber, splintered frames, scattered shingles, and upturned wagons.
Mary, keep Ella inside. I need to see the damage.
She walked past twisted lumber and shattered glass. Her own walls stood without a scratch.
She did it. The mud walls stood, and my roof is scattered across the field. Everything I called foolish saved her, and left me with nothing but splinters.
The mud fort, the name he had carved as a joke, now loomed over the wreckage, silent and immovable. Elizabeth moved through the frozen wreckage, past splintered walls and families standing stunned in the snow.
You two, come with me. There's a fire and room to sleep.
The storm took everything. We have nothing left.
You have your lives, and you have help. That's more than some got last winter.
She led them inside, and the thick walls closed out the cold like a memory.
She's taking them in, without a word of payback, and all I gave her was a carved board.
From the edge of the wreckage, Jacob watched the door close behind them. He did not move to help.
The walls held. Now they'll have to hold a whole family. Good. Let them.
The mud fort sign, still upright, seemed to watch over the ruin. A name built on laughter, now standing on truth. The town had expected a widow's failure. What they got was a fortress that winter could not break. 3 nights after the storm, a scream tore through the frozen air. Fire. The Johnsons' place is ablaze. Flames devoured the dry timber, and a family burst from the door with nothing but the clothes on their backs.
Don't stand in the cold. My walls won't burn. Get inside, all of you.
The fire licked at the edge of her rammed earth wall, but the dense soil merely charred. It would not burn, would not spread. She pulled the shivering family through her doorway. and the thick walls wrapped them in warmth while the fire roared outside.
She ran toward the flames. I would have run away. Her walls don't feed the flames. They just stand there, like stone.
By dawn, the wood frame house was a blackened skeleton, but Elizabeth's wall stood beside it, streaked with soot and still solid. Inside, children slept on pallets, and Mary stirred a pot. The fortress had become a refuge. Jacob, standing on the frozen ground, felt something inside him give way. A pride that had held longer than any timber finally cracking.
Can't sleep. Her walls, the fire, the way she looked at the flames.
He swung his legs over the side, the floorboards groaning under his weight, and pulled on his frozen boots. The door creaked open, and he stepped into a world of wreckage, the snow crunching under his resolve. He stopped before the mud fort sign. The crude letters seemed to mock him now. Not her, him. With a sudden, desperate motion, he tore the plank from the post and let it drop into the snow. He walked on, past the blackened timbers of the Johnson place, until the earth house rose before him.
What do I even say? I was wrong. Doesn't cover it, but it's the truth now.
He knocked softly, the sound swallowed by the thick walls and the waiting dark. Silence. Then the scrape of a bolt. The door swung inward, and a sliver of warm light cut across his face. Elizabeth stood in the gap, her expression guarded. She didn't speak, but her eyes held every question he had been avoiding.
I was wrong, Elizabeth. These walls, they're the truth. Better than anything I ever built.
Why are you here, Jacob? After all your talk, why my door?
Because I want to learn. I need to learn. The way you mix the earth, how you make it stand.
You mocked these walls, called them a freak of nature. Now you want to build them?
I was a fool. I built matchsticks that burned and blew away. You built something that actually holds. Let me help you build more.
A long silence held. Elizabeth studied his hands, rough builder's hands that had pointed and mocked, now hanging empty at his sides.
His hands are finally still. Not pointing, not hammering, just waiting. Be here at sunrise. Bring your own bucket, and leave your pride at home.
A ghost of a smile flickered on Jacob's weathered face, the first in years not born of scorn. He simply bowed his head once, then turned into the dark, an apprentice hired by the woman whose walls had broken his pride before they ever broke winter. The chill of dawn still lay across the field when Jacob showed up, a dented pail swinging from his hand.
Grab a handful. Feel the moisture. It should hold its shape, but not ooze water.
He plunged his hands into the trough. The soil was cold and heavy, nothing like hammering nails.
Already my back protests. She did this for months alone.
Well, looks like he finally found a real job.
On the road, a cart slowed. Two merchants leaned from their seat, whispering. Sweat beaded on Jacob's brow. He didn't look up, didn't speak. He just kept tamping. Inside, Mary stirred the morning porridge. She glanced out the window and shook her head with a faint smile. The rhythm of the tamper became steadier. The wall grew, inch by inch, this time under two sets of hands, and for the first time, the earth house did not stand alone. No longer a fortress for one, the winter broke. Meltwater sang in the ditches, and the ground softened enough to dig another form. They raised a new outbuilding, solid rammed earth, a storehouse against the next winter. The last form came away. They stood in silence, looking at what two sets of hands had shaped. Jacob hung a new sign above the workshop door. The words "Earthworks" by Elizabeth and Jacob gleamed in fresh paint. Elizabeth watched, arms folded. A slow, grudging smile crept across her face. She walked into the new storehouse and touched the cool, packed earth. Across the valley, where there had been only timber and mockery, new earthen walls began to rise. The walls she pounded from raw earth hadn't just held back winter. They had broken down pride, too. They broke bread at her table that evening, the sound of the hammer still echoing. It was never about mud. It was about building something that could stand and letting the storm prove it. A week after the sign went up, a merchant rode in with a purse heavy enough to turn heads.
I need a trading post, fast and cheap. Timber will do. Half the price of your mud, Jacob.
Fast and cheap. That was my whole life before the fire. The price you're offering won't buy a wall that burns in the next gale. I don't build timber anymore.
The merchant's smile thinned. He looked past Jacob at Elizabeth, as if she might override him.
You heard the man. We build earth here. If you want a pile of kindling, I heard there's a sawmill 2 towns over.
The merchant rode off, his purse still heavy, his pride a little lighter.
I could have said yes, but I don't want to be the man who says yes to easy things anymore.
That was your first real test. And you didn't blink. Let's get back to the wall.
He picked up the tamper, and the rhythm of their work began again, steadier than any words. The next morning, a county inspector arrived with a leather-bound rule book and a face like a slammed door. He announced that their earthen walls weren't in the county codes and would have to be demolished or they'd face fines that could seize the land.
Tear them down. After all that winter did to test them.
You can't just wipe out what we've built. We'll contest this at the town meeting.
The inspector gave them 2 weeks to file a formal protest, then rode off, leaving dust and dread in his wake.
Fighting this could drain every cent. But if I let them tear down these walls, I am letting them bury Thomas all over again. Then we fight. We'll put the walls on trial and let the town decide if mud can stand.
She signed the protest with a hand that didn't shake. The ink dried like a vow.
She's risking everything. I'd have taken the fine and torn the walls down myself a year ago.
The gauntlet lay at the town council's door, and Elizabeth had never flinched from a battle the earth could win. The town hall was packed with faces she'd known for years. Some who had called her walls a mud fort, others who had watched their own homes burn. The inspector laid out the county codes, each page a fresh nail in the coffin of her work.
You've seen the storm. You've seen the fire. These walls didn't just stand, they saved lives. Are you going to bury the truth in paper?
My daughter and I would be dead if that woman hadn't opened her door. Her walls are the safest thing in this valley.
I built 100 frame cabins, and the wind tore them to splinters. What she builds is what I should have been building all along.
The council murmured. Some nodded, but the inspector merely closed his book and gave his ruling. He decreed that an independent engineer must test the walls for load and fire resistance at Elizabeth's expense, to be paid before the week's end.
The last thing I still have of Thomas. But I'd rather his ring save these walls than sit in a drawer. I'll pay. And when those tests prove what I know, the county will have no choice but to write these walls into their codes.
The town had ridiculed her for a year. Now they'd watch her stake her late husband's ring on a test of mud and fire. The morning of the test, the engineer arrived with a cartload of equipment, hydraulic jacks, blowtorches, and cold steel weights. He pumped pressure against the wall until the frame groaned. The gauge climbed past every mark, but the earth did not yield. Then the fire. A roaring pyre against the wall's face, flames licking 6 feet high for a full hour. When the embers were swept away, the wall stood charred but whole. The thermometer behind the flame registered nothing more than a warm afternoon.
He said they'd last centuries. Today, they proved they'd outlast a county book.
The inspector took the engineer's report, read it twice, then removed his spectacles. His voice carried through the silent crowd. The rammed earth walls pass all load and fire standards. The code will be revised to include this method.
You did it, Elizabeth. You beat them all. Winter, fire, and the blasted county.
Thomas, we did it. The mud fort is county code. Let them build timber if they want, but we'll build stone from the soil.
Hell, I'll build you a sign myself. Earthworks by Elizabeth and Jacob, code approved.
As the crowd melted into the dusk, Elizabeth walked home alone, her shadow stretching long across the snow. She opened the small wooden box on the mantel and lifted Thomas's ring, the gold warm in her palm.
We didn't have to sell you after all. The walls held, and so did I.
By noon the next day, The county clerk nailed the revised code to the town board. Rammed earth was law.
There it is, in black and white. Rammed earth construction, allowed by county ordinance. Your walls, Elizabeth?
The town wants to hold a barn raising in your honor. They're calling it the Mud Fort Fete.
Tell them to save their nails and hammers. If they want to raise something, I'll teach them to raise earth.
I'll be right there with the first bucket. Mud fort to county code, who'd have thought?
That evening, Elizabeth opened the journal her husband had left her, its pages now filled with her own neat script. She wrote, "Today, the county recognized rammed earth. Thomas, the mud fort is law. We did it." Within a month, a line formed at the workshop. Farmers, storekeepers, even the doubting merchants who had once whispered. Elizabeth taught them how to test the soil's moisture, how to layer and tamp, her voice carrying the authority of a woman who had already won.
You know, when I hung that mud fort sign, I thought I was clever. Now I am just another man with a bucket, grateful to learn.
One morning, Elizabeth slipped a small, pressed block of rammed earth into the soil beside Thomas's grave.
This is what your journal gave me, Thomas. Not just walls, a whole town learning to build.
Across the valley, new earthen walls rose like ramparts against the sky, and people finally understood. The mud fort had been a fortress all along, and in the heart of that town, a house still stood, thick, warm, and immovable, pounded from raw earth by a woman who refused to let winter break her. She pounded her walls from raw earth, and they beat the worst winter, the fiercest gale, and the deepest pride. And every morning, the sound of tampers rang from her workshop, a steady heartbeat that proved even the coldest season couldn't silence a woman who built with the earth beneath her feet. And the mud fort, once a joke carved in pine, became the one name nobody ever laughed at again. Ayla, now a keen-eyed girl of 10, pressed her palm against the sun-warmed wall. "It's alive, isn't it?" she whispered.
It is. The earth remembers the sun, and it gives it back when the cold comes. That's the secret.
Jacob set down his bucket and watched them, the girl and the woman who had taught him what strength really looked like.
That girl will be teaching me next. Already asks better questions than I ever did.
In the evenings, the house filled with the rhythm of stories, of the storm that tried to tear it down, and the fire that couldn't. And the children learned that the safest place in the valley had once been a joke called the Mud Fort. Spring came again, and the workshop never fell silent. The tampers beat like a pulse, and the walls rose higher. Elizabeth looked out over the valley from her doorway, and the scars of the old winter faded under fresh grass. She placed a sprig of heather on Thomas's grave, then walked back to the workshop, her shadow stretching long. She had pounded her walls from raw earth, and in the end, they held more than just a house. They held a future, years later. Travelers stopped at the rise and pointed. "That's the mud fort," they said, and nobody corrected them anymore. The workshop outgrew its first walls. New faces arrived, hands eager to learn, and Elizabeth taught them all.
The earth doesn't care who you are. It only asks that you pack it well.
She's right. I am living proof. The man I was would have laughed at this bucket. Now I carry it with pride.
Mary became the cook of the expanding household, and Ella could tamp a layer as straight as any grown man. And Jacob, the old mocker, became the foreman, still carrying the bucket he'd brought on his first morning of truth. Elizabeth's hair grayed, but her hands never weakened. The walls she built had outlasted the doubt. On clear nights, she still spoke to Thomas, telling him of the day's work and the new walls that would keep others warm. And the mud fort stood, thick and warm, a monument to the fact that sometimes the strongest thing a person can do is refuse to stop. She pounded her walls from raw earth, and they were enough.